Joining us on the line is Joshua Meservey. He's a Heritage Senior Policy Analyst, and apparently the Chinese hate him, meaning like the Chinese government. Zhao Lijin was the spokesman for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and has attacked Heritage Foundation. Why? Because Heritage Foundation has alleged that the Chinese government has basically been attempting to bug all African government buildings of which they can gain access. Joining us on the line is Joshua Meservey. Joshua, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Ben.
So why don't you explain exactly what information you came across here and what prompted your allegations that the Chinese government has been basically bugging African government buildings?
Yeah, sure. So in 2018, it came out that the African Union headquarters building, which is located in Ethiopia, was bugged by the Chinese. And the Chinese company had actually built the physical structure. Huawei, which is the huge Chinese telecoms company, had built the ICT infrastructure, both of which were completely compromised. Not too surprising, frankly. So that sparked some interest, and I wondered how many other African government buildings might be susceptible to this sort of thing. So I've spent the last several years off and on collecting the data. I found at least 165 government buildings that Chinese companies have built in Africa, ranging from prime minister's residences to parliaments to military and police installations. And I think, we're justified in assuming that all of these buildings, or most of them, I should say, are compromised by Chinese spying in some way.
Okay, so given the fact that the Chinese government was spying on them, so now they're denying this. This is not the last time or the first time they'll be denying rumors about attempting to exploit their foreign connections. Why should the United States care whether Beijing is spying on African government buildings?
Yeah, this is the critical question, right? And I draw out four reasons in the report, but I'll just hit the major ones. One is that China can use these buildings as a venue for spying on Americans. So there's frequently senior American officials, including military officials, who are in these buildings talking with their African counterparts, discussing counterterrorism operations, joint exercises, things of that nature. And then the second one is that it can really disadvantage U.S. companies. So a lot of American companies are operating on the continent, including our tech companies that are more and more interested in the continent, Facebook, Twitter, they're all there. And these, of course, are primary targets by the Chinese government for espionage, for IP theft, all of this. And if they have access, which I'm sure they do, to at least some of these buildings, that can help them potentially gain access to useful information from these tech companies, but also from other American companies. And then I'll finish up by saying, right now we're seeing the problems associated with China building these government buildings because it builds great goodwill with African governments, and they all vote in international forums, and they frequently vote together. So that's 54 votes that China can pretty reliably depend on to push its international agenda. It's going to be very hard to hold China accountable for the COVID-19 cover-up and its botched handling of the pandemic, while it can rely on those 54 African countries to support it internationally.
So what should the United States be doing to counter the activities of the Chinese here? Obviously, the Chinese have been attempting to expand their influence all over the world. They've been using the Belt and Road program for years in order to basically try to buy off foreign governments. And then meanwhile, they've been attempting to install technologies that allow them to take advantage of their supposed largesse. How should the United States be countering all of this?
Yeah, you're exactly right. This is a long-running attempt and a pretty successful one in the African context by the Chinese government to buy goodwill. And so the U.S. needs to, I think, a couple things. One, we just need to be more engaged in Africa. We do a lot there, the U.S. government does, but there's more, particularly incentivizing our companies to get more involved there. The American private sector is unparalleled. It's a massive competitive advantage for the United States. So we should really be encouraging them to get involved because there's lots of opportunities there. The Chinese economy, the African economy, if you think of it as a continent, is really attractive in many ways. So we should be doing that. We need to be vigilant about and about what the Chinese are up to on the continent. I think we've ignored a lot of these issues. My idea for tracking these government buildings should not have been a novel one. This is, to my thinking, a fairly obvious one. Once that report came out about the African Union bugging, this is something we should have been looking at and thinking through the ramifications. We haven't. So we just need to be more alert. And finally, I think we need to be more strategic about which countries we try to engage with. Some, frankly, are so in the bag for Beijing that there's not much we can accomplish with them. So we need to do an assessment of, look, which governments can we actually work with? Which ones can we make some headway for our strategic priorities? And which ones do we just have to say, well, we'll stay in touch, but honestly, you're just too enmeshed with Beijing, so there's nothing we can really do.
And so Joshua Meservey, Senior Foreign Policy Analyst for Africa and the Middle East at the Heritage Foundation. Joshua, really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.